A little while ago, I made a video on this 7th gen HP microserver, and a ton of you guys asked me to check out the 8th gen models, which have upgradable CPUs, built-in out-of-band management, and some other cool features. So I hopped on eBay, got distracted, and somehow ended up with this Dell PowerEdge instead. Yeah, this is completely different, but I still found it to be surprisingly good in some ways, and also surprisingly infuriating in others. It's packed with a lot of features, some more obvious than others, and maybe, just maybe, it could actually make sense as a home server. So let's check it out and see if this was a great find, or if I just wasted even more money on eBay. Shocker. This is the Dell PowerEdge T330, a server that can either stay in this tower configuration or be rack mounted. I picked mine up on eBay for just under $200 or around $250 with tax and shipping. I was drawn to this system for a few reasons. First, I just love drive bays. I think I have a problem, and I couldn't help myself. But beyond my lack of self-control, this system offers a lot of real server features you won't find in typical consumer or business PCs, such as redundant hot swappable power supplies, out-of-band management, front panel controls, and more. Oh, and it also supports ECC memory thanks to the Xeon E3-1230 V5 CPU. This 4-core 8-thread Skylake chip has a base frequency of 3.4 GHz and a max turbo frequency of 3.8 GHz. And yeah, these E3 Xeons aren't quite as impressive as the Xeon scalable lineup of server CPUs. They're basically just beefed up desktop chips, but they still have their perks. One of them is that, unlike the big boy Xeons, the E3s can come with integrated graphics, which could help with tasks like transcoding. Well, potentially. Also, unlike standard desktop CPUs, they support unregistered DDR4 ECC, like the 32GB that was included with this system. On the front of the T330, there's obviously the 8 3.5-inch drive bays, although mine only has 4 actual caddies, the bottom 4 are just these lame little placeholders. Above that, there are 3 5.25-inch bays with one housing a DVD drive, and at the very top, there's a small but very handy control panel with a display for system info and error readouts. That actually turned out to be really helpful almost immediately. Moving to the back of the system, at the top you'll find the 2 redundant hot swappable 495-watt power supplies, and then at the very bottom, there's a variety of USB Type-A ports, as well as dual gigabit NICs. There's also an iDRAC port for remote management, which also has an SD card reader that I believe can be used for things like storing logs, configuring settings, and even storing ISOs for install media. And lastly, below that, you'll find a DB9 port for serial and a VGA output. To get to the inside, you can open up the side panel and... Yeah, I probably should get this thing cleaned up a bit. Before taking anything apart though, I always like to make sure that everything is working first. So I grabbed a monitor, hooked everything up, and...
Power strip was off.
It worked. There were a few errors on the front, but 2 were related to only having one power supply connected, which made sense, and the other was for a bad system battery which could easily be replaced later. I started taking everything apart to be able to clean the system up a bit, but this is also a good chance to look at some of the internals. One of the first things you might notice when opening this up is the cooling solution, which is actually just a single fan. Well, unless you include the fans and the power supplies, but other than that, there's just this one fan that pulls air through the front drive bays, and then through the CPU cooler via this plastic air guide. It seems to do a pretty good job, although, well, as you'll see shortly, it does get a bit... Interestingly, there doesn't seem to be any airflow for the RAID controller, which is plugged into one of the PCIe slots. That card has 2 cables plugged into the very snugly fit mini SAS HD connectors that I definitely didn't break. Those cables were connected to the backplane, which interestingly not only had a power input, but also had this 4-pin power output to go to the 5.25-inch bays. There was also this odd little dual SD card slot that appeared to be connected to a by-one PCIe slot. Now there's definitely more to talk about with the internals of the system, but it might be best to talk about that once it isn't covered in a thick layer of dust. Most components just easily popped out of place, and the motherboard was held in with Phillips screws as you would normally expect. After getting all of the electronics out of the way, I used a vacuum cleaner to suck up all of the dust bunnies. Recently, it seems to be raining anytime I need to clean up components, so I had to dust everything out in my garage. After wiping all of the plastic stuff down with isopropyl alcohol, I put everything back in the case, and then took care of a few finishing touches. I also replaced the 4 placeholders with actual drive caddies that I picked up for pretty cheap on Amazon. They don't look exactly the same, but close enough. Oh yeah, and you might have noticed that early on the system was a little bit crooked, and that's because it looks like the last owner had this thing rack mounted, and I guess lost the bottom pieces, so it was just resting on these little bolts for the rack rails. To fix that, I just 3D printed some simple little feet. And with all of that, this server was looking much better. With all of that dust out of the way, we can take a better look at some of the features, like for example the 4 PCIe slots. Now, one of the disadvantages of the Skylake E3 Xeons is the lack of PCIe lanes, at least when compared to the server lineup of CPUs. As you can actually see here on this helpful diagram inside the case, there's one Gen 3x8 slot and one Gen 3x4 slot connected to the CPU. Then there's another x4 slot and a x1 slot wired to the PCH. This is a little confusing because the x8 slot and x4 slots are actually using larger physical slots, so it's important to take that into account. In between a few of the PCIe slots is an internal USB 3 port, and then there's also that dual SD card slot thing I mentioned earlier. And I think that was mostly there to have redundant SD cards to boot hypervisors like older versions of VMware. The backplane is connected via the PCIe RAID controller, but the motherboard has 6 more SATA ports available, and conveniently 4 of them are via this mini SAS connector. And I say conveniently because, well, if you wanted to, you could add in a 3x5¼ inch adapter like this one here to add 4 more hard drive bays. Then you could use a mini SAS breakout cable to have a clean little cable run all the way up to the backplane. And I considered doing that, but well, I don't have enough drives to actually make that happen. Lastly, underneath the CPU cooler, there's the 2 16GB sticks of DDR4 ECC, but there's also 2 empty slots, so you could pretty easily add some more sticks to max this thing out at 64GB. Okay, so that's all of the hardware, but what's it like actually using this thing? Well, I was going to turn it on and start testing things, but I immediately got another error on the front panel. This time it wasn't about the power supplies or battery though. Instead it was giving me an error about CPU voltages being out of range and recommended reseating the CPU. Up until this point I hadn't touched the CPU, but I had pulled out the memory, so I tried reseating that with no luck. So I decided to give reseating the CPU a shot, but that's when I noticed what I'm sure many of you have already been commenting down below, which is that the 4-pin EPS 12V cable was most definitely not plugged in. Fortunately, that was an easy fix, and since I already had the cooler off, I figured it would be wise to replace the thermal paste on the E3 1230 V5. I also swapped out the CMOS battery because, well, not only was I getting an error on the front panel, but also, last time I checked, it's not 1998. I also taped down the intrusion detection sensor because if I didn't, the server would sound like I didn't have any issues getting into the BIOS settings and was able to make a few important tweaks. First, I changed the system profile setting from performance to performance per watt to hopefully lower power draw and also minimize the I also tried to set the RAID controller to HBA mode, but this didn't work until I cleared the configuration. After that, I could switch it to function as an HBA so that all of the drives would just appear individually. I also configured some of the iDRAC settings, but I'll come back to that a bit later on. I swapped out the DVD drive for a 2.5-inch SSD and installed Proxmox with no issues, and this gave me a chance to see just how much power the system was drawing. To try to minimize power draw as much as possible, I ran PowerTop AutoTune as well as this AutoASPM script thanks to Wolfgang's channel. And well, don't let this giant system fool you. At idle, it was drawing between 36 and 37 watts, and that was with both power supplies connected. I'm not that familiar with redundant power supplies and how much of a difference there is between having one plugged in versus 2 plugged in, so I disconnected the second one, and the power dropped to around 33 to 34 watts, which also isn't terrible, especially considering all of the hardware in this thing, and the fact that it's almost a decade old at this point. Like I mentioned earlier, this thing can get pretty loud, especially on startup, but after getting into the operating system, it was actually pretty quiet. That changed a little bit after adding in some hard drives though. The drive trays aren't toolless, so it took a while to put in all the screws, but I got all 8 drive bays populated with some 4TB Western Digital drives. And everything worked without any issue. The only downside really was that this caused the system fan to ramp up just a little bit. Not so much that I would say it was loud, but it definitely wasn't something that I would want to have sitting in my office all day. All 8 drives showed up in Proxmox, and I planned to set up a TrueNAS VM, but when I tried to pass through the HBA with PCIe pass-through, I was getting some errors related to IOMMU mapping. I didn't dig too deep into this, but it seems like the issue has to do with how Dell's firmware enforces IOMMU mapping. There might be some workarounds, or I just possibly could have swapped out the HBA, but instead I just decided to switch to TrueNAS. Now here, instead of a 2.5-inch SSD, I first tried installing TrueNAS on an NVMe SSD. Obviously there isn't an NVMe slot, so I used this little PCIe adapter. I considered using a quad adapter like I used in the past, hoping that maybe at least the by 8 slot supported bifurcation, but sadly this machine just doesn't support bifurcation at all. So I decided to stick with the little single slot adapter, which works just fine for the install, but as I feared, the system doesn't let you boot via PCIe. So I had to just reinstall TrueNAS Scale onto another 2.5-inch SATA SSD. With TrueNAS running, I was able to add all 8 drives to a pool, and after also adding in a 10 gig SFP Plus NIC, I had a pretty sweet little TrueNAS box. Honestly, this system would work pretty well for someone like me with lots of projects and files to store, but maybe it could also work pretty well as a media streaming server with something like Jellyfin. For that, I had what I thought was going to be a good idea. Remember how earlier I mentioned that some of the E3 Xeons actually have integrated graphics? Well, the 1230 V5 doesn't, but this 1245 V6 does. Plus, it's a Kaby Lake CPU, and one of the benefits of that is that it supports decoding 10-bit HEVC. So this could be the perfect CPU upgrade to make this an ideal Jellyfin or Plex system. Now, because this was a Kaby Lake V6 CPU, I needed to make sure the BIOS was up to date. And that was pretty easy. I just downloaded the most recent BIOS to a flash drive, and then used the boot manager to boot into that file and update the BIOS. After swapping CPUs out, the system posted with no issues, and I was off to the races. Or at least I thought I was. I got a Jellyfin container up and running, but I couldn't get hardware accelerated transcoding working because, well, I couldn't get the integrated graphics working at all. That's because the T330 automatically disables the integrated graphics in favor of the onboard Matrox video adapter. And as far as I can tell, there's no way to change that. At least not anywhere that I could find online. So realistically, your only options for transcoding are either to use the CPU or to add in a dedicated GPU. Also, to be clear, this was probably something I could have discovered with a very quick Google search beforehand, but sometimes I like to avoid looking up too much before doing these types of videos. I kind of just enjoy the process of figuring it out on my own, and sometimes it makes for a more fun video. But if you're not making videos like I am, well, just definitely do your research before buying anything like this. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on was the iDRAC remote management feature. I'm not super familiar with iDRAC, but it's similar to something like IPMI where you can remotely access and manage the system, even if it's powered off. To configure it, I went into the system setup, configured the network settings, created a root user password, and then in my web browser, I went to the IP address I had set up and logged in. From there, you can access a lot of features like monitoring tools, power controls, and even a virtual console, but sadly, some of those features require an enterprise license. Now, you can get a free 30-day trial license, but, well, that only works if the previous owner didn't also use a trial license. It's cool that it's an option, but it's a bummer that you have to pay extra to actually use it. There's a lot to like with this Dell system, but also a lot to not hate, but be really, really annoyed by. On the positive side, the power draw was pretty decent considering the specs and age. You also get some nice features like ECC, 8 drive bays, plus the included HBA, another 4 ports via that cool mini SAS header, 3 5.25-inch bays, redundant power supplies, remote management, dual NICs, lots of cool stuff. But you also don't get access to the integrated graphics, the HBA doesn't handle PCIe pass-through very well, there's no bifurcation support, you have to pay for a license if you want certain remote management features, and you might have to deal with some noise. Also, if you're wanting one that's in at least decent shape, it's probably going to run you at least $250. Now, I know Dell isn't designing systems like these for home labbers and tinkerers, but it really sucks that this thing is so close to being a really solid home server system. It's still not bad if you're just looking for a solid 8-bay NAS, or even a 12-bay NAS with an add-in adapter, but you won't be able to do some stuff that you can easily do with other systems. As with pretty much every computer that I cover on this channel, there's a possibility that for the right use case and the right price, this chunky old boy might still be put to good use. But otherwise, well, maybe you might just be best off looking into some other options. What do you guys think though? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the Dell PowerEdge T330. Maybe you have one, maybe you have some experiences. Let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you liked this video, maybe give it a thumbs up, maybe hit subscribe, and if you want to support the channel even more, maybe consider becoming a RAID member for as little as $1 a month. With that, you get early access to ad-free videos and a few other perks, so maybe consider checking that out. That's about it for this one though, so as always, thank you guys so much for watching, stay curious, and I really can't wait to see you in the next one.